Hello everyone and welcome to our Professional Development webinar series. Thank you for joining us for our presentation titled Bereavement Ministry Giving Voice to Our Grief and Suffering with authors David Aaker and Jan Nelson. For those of you who are here with us for the first time, my name is Jared Dees. I'm the Digital Publishing Specialist at Ave Maria Press, and I will be your moderator for today's webinar. This webinar is brought to you exclusively by Ave Maria Press in partnership with the National Conference for Catechetical Leadership, the National Association for Lay Ministry, and the National Federation of Priest Councils. Everyone in the audience is muted today, but you are able to ask questions, and the questions may be sent to our presenters using the questions section of the GoToWebinar panel, which you can see displayed here. Please take a moment now to find that box for typing questions in your GoToWebinar panel, and simply click the Send button at the bottom right-hand corner to send your questions to our presenters, and I'll read as many of those questions as I can at the end of the presentation today. I would also like to note this webinar is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be sent to you later this week via email, so please watch your inboxes. So now that we've gone through all the technical information once again, I would like to extend a very warm welcome to our presenters. David Aaker brings a broad spectrum of personal and professional training, including grief counseling, hospital chaplaincy, and pastoral ministry, to his book, The Bereavement Ministry Program, A Comprehensive Guide to Churches, co-written with Jan Nelson. He's the pastor of St. Paul Lutheran Church in La Center, Minnesota, and he and his wife have 5 children. Jan Nelson has served in clinical, educational, and church settings and holds a master's degree in human development. She founded and is executive director of a community healing center in Fargo, North Dakota called Heart Springs. She lives in Fargo with her husband and has 2 children. David and Jan, welcome and thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Jared.
Okay, Jan, I'm going to hand things over to you.
Okay, thank you. Well, first of all, let's see, we'll go there. We'll get this lined up first. There we go. All right. Well, we wanted to give you a little background about David and I. You heard a little bit, but to go a little bit deeper, David and I met in hospice work when David was a hospice chaplain. And I did an internship underneath David. And it was later that he invited me to become a minister of health at his church. But we wanted to develop a bereavement ministry program much like hospice had for churches at the time, and this was now like in the early 1990s. And so we started to write just a little pamphlet. We started to write a little pamphlet together, and it ended up being this book. So that was never our original intent. And since then, I have set up 2 other bereavement ministry programs at 2 different churches, and then started a community healing program. And David, do you have something to add to this?
No, sounds good. We just had fun developing it, and as Jan said, we didn't intend to publish a book, but we're grateful that the material has been helpful to many congregations throughout the United States and Canada, and I know we have some listeners up in Canada, and I'd like to certainly welcome them as well.
All right.
Can we I don't want to interrupt, but some people can't see the screen. Can you just double check to make sure it's that you clicked on the Show My Screen option? I don't think we can see the slides quite yet.
Right there?
There we go, yeah. There we go. So everyone should
Okay.
be able to see it now. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you.
Looks great,
So-
Jan.
All right, David, here we go. All right, why are we here today? And number 1, we are here to give you an overview of the 3 psychological manifestations of grieving. We're here to talk about giving voice to those who are disenfranchised and to give voice to those who are dealing with ambiguous losses. So God can see into your broken heart, my friend. He hears the grieving from the depths of your grief. He can understand what you are experiencing and thinking and feeling. He knows what you want to say or need to say but find it impossible to say. He accepts that helpless feeling as your prayer. And that was really the gist of what we were trying to do, is how do we talk about grief? So what are the phases? And those who specialize in grieving no longer use the word stages. That is an old term. And they've really gone into using the word phase. And so that there is a commonality between these three phases. But that doesn't mean that an individual goes into a certain stage and stays there and then they move to the next stage. That's not the way grieving works. Grieving is very much of a back and forth, up and down, in and out, convoluted way of dealing with death. And so they talk about phases. So that first phase, I know you're all familiar with, is called shock. And so the individual feels confused, they're numb, they're disorganized. And so if you're helping any individual at that period of time, it would be helping them make the phone calls to those who need to hear about the news. And that individual has a very difficult time connecting with the reality of the things that need to happen step by step. And so this is that first phase of shock. The second phase is considered disorganization or suffering, and this is where the real work of bereavement happens. And they run the emotional gamut of anything from being extremely happy. And I remember myself when my father died, I was in this state of shock. And I was extremely happy to see all the family members who came to the funeral. Some of them I had never seen for years. And so it seems odd to be happy at a funeral, but I was very happy because I was in that state of shock. It was only later, of course, that that work of deep bereavement and sadness came. And then, and people will often talk about this period of time as being a real crazy-making time, where there's lots of ups and lots of downs, and some of that can be all within an hour, that they're joyful and laughing with somebody, and then the next moment something happens and they're feeling very sad and agitated. So it's a real emotional roller coaster. And then the other part is these secondary losses that often aren't acknowledged. So for example, if a child dies, for instance, a parent might be mourning the loss not just of the child, but of the fact that as they grow older, they won't have their son or daughter to maybe come and visit them or even to take care of them. So those are considered the secondary losses that need to be addressed and thought of as well. And then the third phase is called the reestablishment, reconstruction, recovery. And the reason we have those three words there is that depends on the theorist that you're looking at. They all have different wording, but essentially all mean the same thing, is that the individual is ready to get back into the world, get back into their normal rhythm, or a new normal, I should say, and begin again. David, do you have anything to add on that piece?
No, I just think as we move into this next scene of the grief wheel, that to me kind of pictures part of the process that's involved. And you see the loss, you know, things are kind of going on as normal, and then all of a sudden the death or the incident occurs and everything changes. And I always visualize the shock and the protest, the disorganization as kind of going down, where things kind of, as it were, stop or slow down at least. Part of that numbness, denial that is indicated under shock, and then kind of preoccupation of some of that, some of the anger that goes on, then the disorganization. But one of the things that I think that this seminar, this webinar is about, is that as we listen, as we give voice to our loss, as we give voice to the shock, the protest, the disorganization, and then that helping in the reorganization, that the recovery, we come out even stronger than when we went into that loss. So I like it even a three-dimensional, and someday I may try to build a three-dimensional grief wheel. But on the other hand, if we don't listen, we don't give voice to the shock and the protest and the loss and all of that, then the deterioration takes place, and we kind of disengage from society. We some of those physical symptoms that go on, the difficulty swallowing, difficulty breathing, and some of the physical manifestations then of the grief take place. So this has always been very helpful, and in a bit I'll talk about part of the debriefing team that I'm a part of, and so that we give voice, so that that loss doesn't turn against us down the road.
Exactly. So be gracious to me, O Lord, for I am in distress. So when we were looking at writing a book, there were certain things that stood out that most individuals went through. And David already talked about some of these physical symptoms. So what we did in the book then was write a letter. And there is a letter for almost each month for a year. And so we would send out a physical symptoms letter. And it really talks about these chest pains and dizziness and fatigue. And a lot of people go to the doctor because they think that something's wrong. They can't sleep at night and so on and so forth. And one thing I want to say in regard to sleep is that if the individual can move through sleep, or if you can move through sleep, or the sleeplessness, it will go away. It's as you're processing and kind of chewing on that grief that it disturbs the body and it disturbs the sleep cycle. And as you work through it, your sleep patterns will come back again. And so we really discourage people from going on sleep medication or depression medication because what it'll do is it will thwart the grieving process. Now sometimes we know that sometimes if you're just not sleeping and it stays on end, you have to take something. And we certainly encourage you to be balanced about it, that you need your sleep as well as being able to do the grief work. So you do what's best for you, but we do tend to try and help people work through this, the physical symptoms process. And we find it's also important to tell people about this initially because they'll go to the doctor, and we believe that if you tell the doctor what's going on, they maybe will help you through it rather than trying to put you on a medication.
Jan, earlier in my experience as a hospital chaplain in New York City, when we'd go to tell a family the death of their loved one, there was always a nurse there with a shot of Valium or some other
Wow.
antidepressant shot. And so what I think was happening is that they would go home then, and then they'd have their chest pains or their dizziness or their fatigue. So we were able to help the staff say, we'll stay with them during their loss, and we'll stay with them as they try to begin to process this or to give voice to their loss, rather than going home and having it all by themselves.
Yeah, that's excellent. And we've learned a lot about grieving in the last few years. Just when we wrote the book, this was in the early 1990s, there really wasn't much out. And so as people have been researching this, they have come out with this kind of information, how important it is to literally chew on the information and to chew on the grieving. So another letter we send out is about exercise and nutrition, getting a little more protein at this time, and the inability to sleep. We talk about sleep in particular, and I've already talked about that. And then talking about the myths that people will say, oh, this is only going to take you 2 months to get over. You know, when they did a national study and they asked people how long people were supposed to grieve, the average came out at 72 hours. Well, that's 3 days. And that's what people believed was the length of grieving time. And we know now that it can take years. And but again, this has come with research and as we've studied grieving. But people will say all kinds of things, that there's no reason to be angry, you shouldn't feel sorry for yourself, and so forth. So these are the myths that we talk about in the letters as well.
And that's and Jan, that's exactly why I keep coming back to that grief wheel, because I think that grief wheel pictures it so well for us, and we can understand that it's going to take time to go through the shock, through the protesting, through the disorganization, and that's why when you and I as people of faith or people who care can the more that we can give voice to this suffering and this loss, the more that that person then can find their way through that grief wheel and into recovery and not into the deterioration.
Yep. So exactly on this slide here of expressing the emotions and of encouraging people to write or pray or draw, sing, anything that will help them express their emotions and get them outside of ourselves. And then to explore the relationship after death. And David, you came up with such good questions. What qualities do I miss most about you? What do I wish I hadn't said? And to really have people write this down and journal it and write a letter to the individual and say, these are the things I wish I would have said to you while you were alive, or whatever it is.
And just today, two people in my office. One, a little girl who was troubled by losing a friend, and so we talked about the ambiguous loss. I mean, her friend is still alive, but her friend is moving away, and she's grieving, and she needed to give voice to it. And so the reflection pages that are found in our book are so helpful in trying to put down in words, like the first reflection says, late at night when the world is fast asleep, I'm awake thinking about, and then that person can give expression to what they're thinking about and giving voice then to their loss. And another death that occurred in our family just in recent days here at the church, that person wants to send a letter to her husband who had died. And so these reflection pages can kind of help begin the process and allow the person to give voice to their loss and their grief and their suffering.
Beautiful. And we found, I've had feedback from individuals who get these monthly letters, and what they say is that they'll take the letter and they'll sit down with a cup of coffee, and they say the letter comes at the exact right time. It seems to say exactly what I'm feeling this month. And it does begin this process, and technically they call it psychic slapping. That's not such a nice word, I guess, psychic slapping, but that's what they call it in terms of being able to, it's important for you to keep working on your grieving. A lot of times we want to push it away and we don't want to deal with it, we run away. And these letters are just this reminder to say, nope, you need to keep working, you need to keep working. We are accustomed to thinking that if we just had enough faith, we would not have any doubts. Some soldiers are accustomed to thinking that if they just had enough bravery, that they wouldn't have any fears in battle. Some grieving people are accustomed to thinking that if they just had enough faith, they would not feel any sorrow. All of these accustomed ways of thinking are unhelpful. In contrast, faith as courage suggests that faith is trusting God in spite of one's doubts, that bravery is action in spite of one's fears, and that faith is hope in a new tomorrow in spite of one's present sorrow. Sometimes faith is the courage to trust in spite of feeling to the contrary. So one of the other letters that we send out is returning to normal, and talking about what does that feel like, what's the new normal. And if you remember that grief wheel, the arrow starts to go up after the loss. And this word grief attack means that sometimes people will have like a panic attack almost. And I had a friend whose mother had cancer for a number of years, and she was sitting in church. And the organ started to play, and she found herself holding her breath, becoming highly anxious, and had to run out of the church. And what happened was, it was the song that was during her mother's funeral. And so she had a very palpable grief attack. And sometimes people will have them at stoplights where all of a sudden they can't remember how they got from one place to another. It's a very disturbing kind of feeling, but I want to tell you it goes away, and that if you can give word to it sometime and say, when people are talking about this highly anxious, panicky feeling that they get, that you can say, oh yes, you had a grief attack. And it seems to bring calmness and an assurance to them that they're normal, because again, this is that crazy making time. And of course, people will say unkind words to you. Sometimes they'll ignore you because they don't know what to say, and they're trying to say the right thing, but it doesn't always come off the wrong way. So, I mean, it doesn't come out the right way. So, go ahead.
And Jan, just a week ago, I had the same experience. Two daughters of a man that had just died were in church the first Sunday after their father's death, and the organist was playing the prelude, "Beautiful Savior." Well, we sang that. That was one of the hymns at their father's funeral, and they almost walked out of church. They decided to stay, and they were glad that they stayed. But again, that grief attack came upon them, and I just encourage them to, if that happens again, just to go ahead and walk out of church. Come back again, but walk out.
Exactly. Oh, that's great. Yeah, they need to hear these kind words that, yeah, it happens, and it's okay. And then dealing with criticism. People will, say things too like, "Oh, gee, your ring is off already? Didn't you really love him?" Or, "Gee, you shouldn't be having fun." So how do you deal with some of this criticism that will come? And then questioning your faith, being angry, feeling nothingness. Really, these are not uncommon. So one of the worst things would be to say, of course, that, God will take care of this, and you shouldn't be angry, and, so on and so forth. Because really, true faith is not a matter of feeling, but it's the courage to go on believing and hoping. And so it's this encouragement to question your faith. This is okay. God is big enough for us to question our faith in. And
I believe it says in the Bible, "Be angry, but do not sin."
Okay. And then questioning whether there is life after death. And I wrote the Communion of Saints experience. And David, you had a really nice way of explaining that.
Well, whenever I have communion with the folks in my church or in their homes or hospitals, I always picture communion is a community meal. And so I always picture having communion with those who have gone on before. And when I read Hebrews 11, I see that we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses. And so I see all of those saints who have gone on before, my mother and father and my ancestors and others, who are kind of up in that balcony in my life and balcony of the church, kind of cheering us on, saying to the church, "Come on, you guys, you can do it, and you can make it, and you'll be fine." So that's how I picture the communion of saints, and that encouragement, for the woman that was in the office this morning where her father just died. I encouraged her to see her father sitting in the balcony of her life, cheering her on. "Come on, you can make it."
And the other thing is people will have experiences of their loved one. Sometimes they'll dream about them. Sometimes they'll have actual experiences. And for my own mother, after my father died, she hadn't been thinking about my dad, and she had been cleaning the house. She was laying on the couch, and all of a sudden she felt his presence right by her, and he leaned down and he gave her a kiss, and he said, "Everything is okay." And this is not an uncommon experience, but people do not talk about this because people will say they're crazy. And so if you can be aware that these things happen and let them know that these are normal experiences that people have, because I believe if we believe in the communion of saints, that veil is so thin between the living and the dead that I believe that people do come back and tell their loved ones that everything is okay, or they might dream about them. And this is a very normal experience. I can't tell you how many people have these experiences, but they just don't talk about it with other people. And then again, something about support groups, and this would be important to know what support group resources you have available in your community, and then getting involved again. And maybe they're ready to do some volunteer work or get back into work, depending on the age of the individual. May those who sow in tears reap with shouts of joy. Those who go out weeping, bearing the seed for sowing, shall come home with shouts of joy, carrying their sheaves. David, I believe we're moving into the next section here. Oh, no, we did. Sorry, I forgot about the special days. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, just I think it's important for us to acknowledge those special days. And just one quick experience: when I was leading a support group in Fargo, North Dakota, I made a little Valentine card on my computer, and I bought some red gummy bears, and I set it at the table where we were to have our dinner together in our support group. And a number of the people said that was the only Valentine that they received that day. And I think you would have thought that I gave them $1 million, but I gave them a Valentine card because their spouse had always given them a Valentine card, and this was the first year that they didn't receive it. So these are just special days: Christmas, Easter, Valentine's Day, Halloween. I didn't understand until I met with some families who had lost a child how important Halloween was. A very important holiday. And of course Mother's Day and Father's Day. Those are important days to acknowledge.
And I can't stress that anniversary day enough. That day can come and go, but if you from the church are able to make a call, send a letter, anything to acknowledge that day, it means the world to the individual. So these are important days. And then children, of course, have their own needs. They're at their own developmental levels. In fact, I just got a call this last week from another church wondering if we had some information about children grieving. There was a young man who committed suicide, and he had a grade schooler and 2 preschoolers. And so how do you talk to the preschooler? How do you talk with the grade schooler so that they will understand grieving? And so all that information is in our book, and we have a whole separate section, so we're not going to go into that. Okay, now we're going to get into this, and what do these have in common? Death of a pet, living with a chronic disease, or being the spouse of someone living with a chronic disease, losing a limb, having a mental illness, being away at war, coming back from war, dealing with an alcoholic spouse, taking care of someone with Alzheimer's, and a miscarriage. Anyone? Anyone? Since we can't hear you, we'll answer it ourselves. These are called ambiguous losses and disenfranchised grief. And so what are they, and how do we minister? So disenfranchised grief is that grief that is not recognized or acknowledged by society. So loss of a pet, and certainly if any of you who have pets know the importance of this death. Military children moving, abortions, miscarriages, adoptions, suicide, loss of a limb, unfulfilled dreams, financial loss, loss of a homosexual relationship, drug overdose, alcoholism, and professional caregivers such as hospice and emergency personnel who are supposed to be tough, or it's just part of their job. And this moves now right into David's piece that he has been working with those emergency personnel, and he's going to talk about that.
Thanks, Jan. These words, disenfranchised grief and ambiguous losses, I've not always used those words, but have certainly experienced it. Part of my work is dealing with those who are directly involved in trauma incidents, death, major accidents, suicides, fires, drownings. And normally within 24 to 48 hours, I'm part of a team that's a debriefing team for our local sheriff's office here in LeSueur County. We're called in to do a debriefing with those who've been involved in critical incidents. And one of the phrases that kind of goes into this whole webinar experience for Jan and for myself is how do we give voice to that grief and suffering. And part of that comes from an author by the name of Parker Palmer. And Parker Palmer writes in a couple of his books, violence arises when we don't know what to do with our suffering. And so part of what bereavement ministry is about, what being a caring person to one another is about, is to give voice to one another's grief and to their suffering, so that they don't do violence to themselves or to others. And so when we go into a debriefing, and I'll just spell out briefly the debriefing process, we're going in so that we can give voice to the violence, we can give voice to the loss, we can give voice to those who have been involved in the violence, those who see the violence every day, and our firemen, our local EMTs, our sheriff's office, our policemen in our communities. They see this violence every day. And so this is part of that disenfranchised grief. We don't often recognize it. We just say, well, it's part of their job, and we expect them to go on and on without responding to it. One of the things that has been so powerful for me recently, and I had an occasion to talk with one of the leaders in our nation, a man by the name of Clark Paris, and he has an organization called The Pain Behind the Badge, and I spent about half hour, 40 minutes with him in the last couple of days because we had a policeman that was killed, was really ambushed in a suicide call up near St. Cloud, Minnesota, just in the last few days. That funeral's taking place tomorrow for us here in Minnesota. But this organization and this website, and it's located in our resources near the end of our presentation, is an organization to help police and firemen and emergency personnel to deal with their pain. We've discovered that the majority of deaths to law enforcement and emergency personnel is really from self-inflicted wounds rather than hostile fire. The policeman that was killed up near St. Cloud, Minnesota, in a community of Cold Spring, that was obviously by hostile fire, but most law enforcement, without dealing with this pain, find themselves committing suicide. So what happens with many of our emergency personnel is that the stress and the grief and the loss gets piled on top of one another. And because of that, a number of us have designed a debriefing team. And what I want to share with you is just a brief outline of what can be used to debrief someone who's been involved in a major critical incident. The team that I serve on includes a priest, a minister, a deputy sheriff, a fireman, an emergency medical technician, and myself as another clergy. And what we seek always to have at least two of us or more, sometimes as many as 5 of us present when we do these debriefings. And we do them primarily as a group, although this can be done individually as well. And normally when we go into these debriefing times, we have anywhere from 10 to 30 who would be involved in a critical incident. And so just what I've laid out just briefly is kind of the outline that we use. We introduce, obviously, who we are, part of our ground rules of our time together, confidential, no reports. It's not a critique of the particular call that was on. It's voluntary. We don't force you to talk. Everyone that was there was involved with the call, and we ask that pagers and cell phones be shut off. And then we move into the facts, kind of dealing with the surface. We're trying to enter into the pain, and so we talk about what is the role in the incident. Tell us what happened. What did you see and what did you hear? And so we start at the surface and then move in. And then, what are the thoughts? What is your thinking? What were you thinking as you got the call? What were you thinking as you came on the scene? What thought ran through your mind when you realized how bad the incident was? What do you remember thinking when you were packing up and coming back to your home or your station? And then, what are your thoughts now, a few days after that's been completed? And normally when we come through those opening parts of that debriefing, then we can move into the feelings. What made that incident a difficult one? One of the debriefings that we were on, the man discovered that the person who that the call was upon was a relative of his, and he recalled that his own son had committed suicide, and he had never given voice to that suffering. And so even during our debriefing time, he was able to give voice to his own personal suffering, and he found all of the support from his fellow colleagues on the fire department. And then, how have the feelings changed since the incident, and what are you feeling tonight? Normally our debriefings are done at night. And then we move into the reactions. Any different reactions to how you respond today? How did you know that this particular call was getting to you? Any trouble sleeping? Are you feeling or being more agitated? See, the purpose of all of these debriefings is that we don't take those reactions and feelings and then project them onto our spouse or our families or even the next call. And as I often say during our debriefings, I'm there very selfishly because I want them to be at their very best the next time that they go on another call, or I want them to be at their best when they come to help me through a critical time, or my family. And so then we give them some guidelines. We do a little teaching about stress and encourage them to continue to give voice, and we always leave them with our telephone numbers so they could call us at another time. And I know that the priest in our group and myself and another clergy, each of us have received calls after some of those critical incidents, so they can continue to give voice to them, so they don't go down to the local liquor store and kind of drink more than they normally would, or go home and be abusive to their wife, or do other violence to themselves. So that's part of our debriefing, and that's how I along with Jan, came up with this. How do we give voice to our grief and to our suffering? And I think that's very important work for each of us to do.
And what I loved about this debriefing material, which I hadn't seen before, was that I thought you could take these same questions and
Exactly.
go and visit with somebody after
You
the
bet.
death, and they seem to
Absolutely.
be real relevant.
Yep. You
So I'm
started
going to
this.
move. Oh,
Go
go
ahead.
ahead.
Nope. You go ahead.
Okay. I'm going to move this forward a little bit because I know that time is slipping away a little bit. So I just wanted you to know that this material that's coming up next is from Pauline Voss. She's a professor at the University of Minnesota and has done lots and lots of work on ambiguous losses. So this is her material here, and we find it very, very helpful. So there's two types of ambiguous losses, and one is somebody physically absent but psychologically present. So they're at war, adoptive children, being lost, empty nest syndrome, stillborn. So they're physically absent but psychologically present. The second kind is physically present but psychologically absent. So somebody with Alzheimer's or traumatic brain injuries, mental illness, alcohol and drug addiction. So why is this so hard? It's just that the loss is so confusing and baffling and often immobilizing. Is somebody here? Are they not here? Is this temporary or is it permanent? And then the loss is uncertain and family roles need to change to accommodate the loss. You know, is the person in the family? Are they out of the family? And they're denied typically the symbolic ritual of a clear-cut loss, such as a funeral. When somebody has dementia, you don't get to go through some type of ceremony to say that we've lost part of mom today and we need to have a little funeral or some type of ritual. There isn't that, so it's this ongoing loss. And reminds people that life is not always rational and just, and it's a loss that goes on and on. And the mainstream assumptions that if you work hard and play by the rules, you know, that the effort will match the outcome, and that we know by life just isn't true. So how it can affect people then systemically through relationships, not only with partners, but with a family unit, with the community at large, is that it can immobilize people. It creates confusion in decision making, like who's in charge now that mom has Alzheimer's. Or it can freeze the sadness, it can block coping, and it distresses and traumatizes. Like she said here, the brain does not like ambiguity, so it tries to make sense out of it. So what's really going on? And then the individual symptoms is that you'll see people sometimes who are caregivers with this ambiguous loss become frozen in their grief. They go through depression, anxiety, symptoms of trauma even, guilt, helplessness, hopelessness. They might start drinking, stress-related illnesses, lots of aches and pains show up. They might do this abuse to themselves or to others. And then relationally, in a family, the grief again becomes frozen. Ambivalence about grieving, roles, identity, attachments, decision-making, increased family conflict, and so forth. So being at war, I think, is one of those where you are, you're physically absent, but psychologically present. And certainly a lot of our young men and women coming back have a difficult time when they come back. The spouse has taken charge, the husband comes back or the wife comes back, and the spouse is taking care of everything, and how does the spouse reintegrate into the family? And unfortunately, a lot of that reintegration work is very, very hard, and tends to be a lot of divorce with that. Just with empty nest syndrome, when children leave the house, and my children now are 23 and 20, and so I can relate to the empty nest syndrome. It's how do you relate to essentially your new spouse when everything was wrapped up around the kids?
Some of them come back, Jan.
And they do. And so our 23-year-old son just came back. That's why David's laughing. And it was interesting actually preparing for this, because going through this work and talk about ambiguous losses, it's like, okay, is our son in the family or out of the family? Meaning, do we treat him as part of the family now again? Do we have suppers together with him, or do we let him do it on his own? Do we take him on a family vacation? Do we not? Is he going to be there a month, or is he going to be there a half a year? We don't. It's an ambiguous loss, and I have to say it's really hard to deal with. But we're working on it. So it is distressful, and all of those things are really important to talk about. And of course, divorce requires a lot of resiliency and flexibility, defining what family is and who's in the family, who's not in the family. And I thought that was interesting, this main secret of remarriage is being able to live with ambiguity, especially with children, because children will always be involved no matter who you're married to, and the boundaries about when someone is in and someone is out.
And Jan, for me, it's just primarily in dealing with divorce is the acceptance of the brokenness, that we are a broken people, and I'm so grateful that God comes to be with us in our brokenness, no matter what the brokenness is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, being physically present but psychologically absent, we've talked about Alzheimer's a little bit, and of course it goes with brain injury and stroke. There's certainly more depression, I find, with the caregivers, and I do deal a lot with neurological clients, and so with the caregiving that happens with Parkinson's and MS and so forth, we find this this questioning, this are they here, are they not, and mental illness and workaholic, and these are all disenfranchised illnesses as well as ambiguous losses, because mental illness is something that society does not want to deal with very well. I think we're getting better, but that's certainly something. And of course the workaholic spouse who's gone all the time, they might be around, but they're certainly not engaged with the family. So how can we find meaning? How can we make sense of the loss? And so what helps with that is actually naming the problem and really calling it what it is. I have to say it was very helpful when our son came home and my husband and I were starting to have a few more disagreements, about what should we do with our child who's home. And once we named it and said this is an ambiguous loss, I have to say it was very helpful so that you could name it and then choose how you move forward with it. So naming the problem is helpful. Both and thinking that, say, for example, with somebody with Alzheimer's, I'm a caregiver and a person with my own identity and needs. I'm both sad and my hopes and dreams are lost, but I can be happy about finding new ones. Having spirituality gives us hope, forgiveness, human connection, rituals, sacrifice for a greater good, positive attributions. But what hinders it can be these unanswered questions, hatred or anger or blame, secrets, don't keep keeping family members in the dark. And then tempering mastery, how can we modify the desire for control and certainty? And so what helps is recognizing that the world is not always just and fair, and being able to decrease self-blame and regain mastery and control where possible. Of course, the serenity prayer, God, give us the grace to accept with serenity the things that cannot be changed, courage to change the things that can be changed, and the wisdom to distinguish one from another. And what hinders that is wanting to control everything and not being able to control anything, and not knowing when to take charge and when to let go, and believe that one's efforts will always result in the desired income, or a belief that bad things can happen to good people. Reconstructing identity, how can you know who you are now? What helps is reflecting on who you are now, defining who your family is, knowing who your community of support is, learning how to play new roles, recognizing the shifts in who you are and what you will be needed again. And then what hinders that is discrimination and stigma, forced uprooting, isolation, disconnection, hanging on to one absolute identity and fear of change. And normalizing ambivalence, how can you manage the anxiety of mixed emotions, especially negative thoughts, would be recognize and talk about your feelings of ambivalence and guilt. Normalize the guilt and bad feelings, but not harmful actions. That's a big one. Value diverse ways of managing ambivalence. Use the arts, poetry, dance. Know that seeking closure will not stop the negative thinking. And then what hinders moving forward would be seeing the social ambivalence, having family members suppress their negative feelings and emotions. And then revising attachment, how can you let go without the certainty of loss? What helps with that is recognizing that your loved one is both here and gone. So somebody with Alzheimer's, of course, is here and they're gone. Grieving what you've lost and celebrating what you still have. And I love one of the examples in one of her books was talking about this family, and the mother had Alzheimer's and the children were very artistic, and how the young men they loved that mother would say silly things, that her words didn't make sense. And so they just had a very fun time with their mother in this new way of being with her, that they could embrace the change that was happening. And so instead of seeing them as their mother as she always was, they could embrace the new person that she had become, and how helpful that is. And other ways of helping are goodbye rituals for little losses along the way, paying attention to life transitions. And then what hinders it is a completely letting go and kind of a premature closing out. And that would be somebody, for example, there was another example of a young man whose father had Alzheimer's, and he said, Dad is just a piece of furniture. And that's regrettable, completely letting go of the person before they're gone. And then discovering hope. How can we find new hope? And that would be through spirituality, laughing, being more patient, redefining justice. And what hinders it would be hope for too long for life, and so forth. So the importance of ministry is to help connect them with something stable when they're going through these ambiguous losses. So again, that might be helping them to reconnect with a group that they were always a part of. So if mom was always part of a sewing club, could somebody come in so she could reconnect with that sewing club again? Finding meaningful support from the church, helping them do some research, have a visitation person come, have family members get together on Skype and be able to talk with one another. I have to say that is one of the biggest challenges, I think, as a caregiver, is when the caregiver is present with the family and they live in the same town and they understand what mom and dad is going through, and then you have the child that flies in from California who's never been around mom or dad longer than a weekend, and they start trying to dictate what happens within the family. And it puts great stress on the family, lots of conflict. And this would be important to get the family together. Remembering that caregivers need a break, there's a great book called Share the Care. We've got that in our references. Humor, maintaining hope. Offer them, talk about the importance of forgiveness and confession. Witness the suffering of another by staying present, doing what is possible. That's our job, is to witness the suffering, giving voice to the suffering, and give spiritual acceptance of ambivalence. We talked about the arts and nature. And having a funeral ritual, emotional resiliency, and help them learn some of these stress management techniques, just even simple breathing, doing belly breathing, and moving into the mystery with God. I thought this was some great ideas on rituals and offering. I love rituals, don't you, David?
You bet.
There's such a wonderful way to help people transition from one thing to another. And one of the references we have at the back of the slide is on For Everything There Is a Season, and it was a book written by 5 pastors, and they have everything from your first child getting keys to a car to you name it, they've got a ritual for it. So we are going to have these slides.
Great list, Jan. Thank you for sharing all of that.
Yes, you're welcome. So we're going to have this on our website. I'll put it on Heartspring's website. Dave's going to put it on his, on the church website. And so you can have this PowerPoint presentation. So these are our resources, and we're sure willing to take any questions at this time.
Good. Well, thank you very much, both of you, for your presentation. Yeah, well, let's take the next 7 minutes or so we have left to do some questions. I'll take the control back. Thanks so much for offering to share the PowerPoint presentation. Just send me the links that where you're going to post it, and I'll make sure and post that in our email follow-up afterwards. Okay. So we already have a number of questions coming in. That have come in. A lot of them are probably questions that couldn't be answered in just a few minutes, so we'll do our best to address them in just a few kind of short tips or maybe some resources you can address people to. Does that sound good, David and Jan?
You bet.
Okay, so everyone else, please go ahead and add your questions now if you haven't done so already, and I'll read a few here in the time we have left. So, let's see. I read from Elise. I'm working with a woman who lives in a nursing home, and she just lost her twin sister who is living at the same nursing home. Can you recommend any books or materials for her to read or that I can suggest to her? Thank you.
David?
David, you want to start?
Oh, Jan.
There's so many. That's the hard part.
Yeah, I'm sure.
One of the books that I rely upon it's an old book, but it's a treasury of meditations by Gerhard Frost. It's called Seasons of a Lifetime, and just let me read just one. It's called I'm Getting Old. 11:20, my life clock says it's getting late and later, and I hear home sounds. Thank you, God, in this late hour that you are here and there. The book is filled with small little poetry words like that, and Gerhard Frost was a personal friend and a professor of mine, and just a kind and gentle voice through all of his writing. Seasons of a Lifetime, and it's by Gerhard Frost.
Thanks. And just asked, I coordinate a ministry for divorced, separated, and widowed persons. Although they form small groups by the circumstance for discussion, what can you recommend for an entire group format?
I like just being able to talk about the ambiguous losses. I think this is something that's really not talked about a whole lot, and to really give a name to something that people feel already, I think gives them a sense of recognition, or that what they're going through is not odd or different. And I would really take up this idea of ambiguous loss and talk about that in a large group.
One of the participants today on our webinar has put together 12 steps of hope, and the fourth step says, made a searching inventory of my relationship with my deceased loved one, could be my divorced loved one, and accept that we can't change the past, but realize we did the best that we could at the time. And this comes from a hospice grief support in Mankato, Minnesota. 12 Steps of Hope.
And we can put that on our resource list as well.
Okay, great. Jan, I think you mentioned something about that they no longer talk about stages but now phases. Vince asks, can you further explain the difference between the phases and the stages of grief? Either one of you, I guess, could answer this.
Sure. Well, the stages came from, and I'm blanking on her name. David,
Elizabeth Kubler-Ross.
Thank you. So she developed these stages of grieving, and the stages of grieving were initially set for somebody who's dying. That when somebody was dying, they went through the stage of denial, and then they went through the stage of anger, and then they went through the stage of so on and so forth. And it was seen as a step-by-step approach that before you died, you went through these 5 stages. What happened, though, is that those stages of grief were tacked on to bereavement, that after the person had died, that the person would go through these same 5 stages. And what they have found in grief research is that that's not true. They don't go through stages step by step by step. And so that's why the research has really gone into these phases, because it's not so locked in. People don't go through anger and then neatly and nicely go into the next phase. They're all over the place, and that's why I really like the term more disorganization, and really the idea of work on bereavement, because your emotions are all over. There's no nice neat stage.
Okay, Carla asks, she says there are many support groups for caregivers, but none seem to deal with grief. Are you aware of any resources for groups?
Oh, great question.
For caregivers?
So there are many groups for caregivers, but what about, but none seem to deal with grief. Do you have any thoughts?
Well, I know on our caregivers group, we just had the individual talk about ambiguous losses, actually, and I think that's, again, I go back to that because that's what caregivers are dealing with. It's this ongoing loss. And I don't know if that's what she was talking about, but that's what came to my mind.
We have a colleague group, us as pastors are caregivers, and so we have a monthly meeting with we call it pastor to pastor up in our area of the country, and that's really a major support group for me to go and talk about the caregiving that I do, and to meet with fellow caregivers.
Okay, and this will be the last question. Shannon said, what are these, she's referring to, you mentioned often the letters. What are the letters the presenters are referring to, and are they a part of your book? she wasn't sure if that was mentioned earlier in the webinar.
Yes, the letters are part of our book, and they're laid out in a reproducible style. So you can take the letter directly out of the book and photocopy it and send it off to the individual.
But Jan, they're also available on the CD that comes with the book, so you can personalize it and put it on the church stationery from the particular church that you're working with.
Mm-hmm. Or you can email it.
Yep.
And I don't want to make this a sales pitch for, this is a webinar about resources, but can you talk a little bit more about the program, just what else is in it? We are going to offer it, because you're the presenters, we are going to offer it here with a discount, but I don't know, could you mention a little bit more about what is included in the program?
We have the letters in it. So there's 10 letters, I believe, that are in it. There is a whole section just on dealing with children and their kind of grieving. We have a supplemental resource which deals with special days, suggestions for handling the holidays, and then we get into special kinds of grief. So traumatic grief after, say, even a murder, a grief. I have to look through the book because there's so many.
And the first published book back in '98, of course, came before 9/11, and how that changed us as a nation. So we did not have, in the new edition, we do have a terrorism section and dealing with grief regarding terrorism and more trauma resources than we did in the original book.
Great. Like I said, this webinar was really for people who are serving the ministry and a resource in and of itself, but I wanted to make sure people had a good idea, because they were asking about the letters, and I wanted to make sure everyone had a good idea of what the program included. We are offering it to webinar participants today at a discount, or for $10 off. It's a normal price of, I believe, $49.95 or around $50. So use the webinar, or the promo code Bereavement12, the number 12 at the end, and that will take $10 off the price of this collection of resources. You must use the code by next Tuesday for it to work, so make sure you do that this week or early next week. So thanks a lot. Before we sign off, I just wanted to thank our partners, and especially both of you, David and Jan, but our partners for the National Conference for Catechetical Leadership, the National Association for Lay Ministry, the National Federation of Priest Councils, for their partnership in this series. And if you're not familiar with them, please go check out their websites. If you haven't already connected with Ave Maria Press, you can do so online at Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Vimeo. We have posted a number of resources out there and other social network sites. We are recording this webinar, and all the recordings of all the webinars are posted at avemariapress.com/webinar-videos. Today's webinar will be posted there later this week. It's an excellent resource for teachers, catechists, and all people involved in parish ministry or seeking their own personal spiritual nourishment. And finally, please mark your calendars for the next webinar. This is the last webinar of the 2012 season, the 2012 year. But our first webinar will be just after the holidays with Mary Torres Paust talking about her new book, Cravings. Just after those New Year's resolutions are made, her title of her presentation is What Are You Craving in 2013? 5 Ways to Restore Sanity and Serenity to your relationship with food. So well-timed just after the holidays. And we look forward to seeing you all there after the new year. Thank you again, David and Jan, for your presentation today. Really excellent thoughts and resources. Very much appreciated.
Thank you, Jared, for leading us.
Okay,
thanks, Jan.
Thanks, David.
Have a great week, everybody.
Thank you.